Hi friends, welcome back. Naji here. We are continuing a discussion on cache, LangGraph cache, and in this video we will be discussing on how can we cache a task. Okay, so in our last video we discussed how to cache a node, and here we are only focusing on a task. For that, let me import few packages. So as I mentioned in the last video, ensure that you have the latest version of LangGraph. Okay, so here LangGraph.cache.memory, I can import the InMemoryCache. Graph.types, I can import the CachePolicy here. Let me import a task also. Okay, so these are the basic imports that we needed, and here what is the plan of action? So here I'm going to create a data frame which contains the user information. So by providing a user ID, we will be fetching data from this data frame. So this is kind of a real-time simulation of simulation of the program, because usually like in our real time when we write a program, like we usually save the data into our database and we will fetch it from the data, right? So based on some user ID, we will be querying the data and we will fetch the data from the database. So this task is actually time consuming, right? So we could able to cache the data. That is what I'm going to show. So here instead of database, I'm just using the data frame, okay, to save some time. Okay, so here I am importing the pandas also. Okay, so I don't have the panda. Okay, so let me do a pip install pandas. Let me do it. So in between I can, okay, so I believe it's there, import pandas as pd. Here I'm going to define a data. So this data contains the user ID. So I'm going to give user ID as 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Then I'm giving some names. So names can be anything, right? For the time being I'm giving Alice, I'm giving the Bob, and I can give Charlie, then David, and I'm going to give A. These are the names, and I can give some kind of age also. Okay, I can give like 24, 25, 26, maybe 30, then 45. Okay, it's in progress. Okay, surely it will not take this much time. Maybe let me stop this, execute it again. Okay, now I am creating a data frame, pd.dataFrame. I can pass the data equal to data, df.head. Okay, we can see the user information. Consider this is a table. Now I'm going to define a function. The function is going to fetch the data based on the user ID. So here I can say user info. Okay, here I have the user ID. User ID will be integer, and this will return a string which contain the string or integer, I can say. Now here also I'm going to sleep it for 2 seconds. Now get the user from the data frame. So what I am going to do, I am going to query user underscore ID, which is equal to user underscore ID dot, I can take a iloc of 0, return my user, return my I can, instead of returning it, I can return like name, which is equal to user dot name, sorry, it is user dot name, age, which is equal to user user.age. Executing it. Okay, so now we are done with our user information function. Now let's define a state. I can mention the user ID here, so that will be integer. Then I can mention the result. Result is not needed here, so let me make it a string or something like that here. Let's make the in-memory cache defined. So this is my cache. Now define a task. The task will be get slow, I can say slow user info. Just name it like this. Here I am getting a user ID, I can say. This will be a integer, right? What this is done is I have a user info. I can call the get user info. I am passing the user ID here. Return user info. So this is my task. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to define cache this particular task. For that I can use task. Okay. Now I can set the cache policy. The cache policy will be time to leave. I'm going to set it as a 120 seconds. Okay. So we have our cache is ready. Now let's define our main function. So in the main function I will have an input dict, and this will return the dict of str. Now my result is what I'm going to call this slow info path. Here I can pass the input. This will be my user ID. I can get the result back. Return result. Passing the result here. Okay, so what we have done, so let's have a look on this. So I have my pandas is there. I'm defining in a data frame, and I'm getting the data frame as a df, and this is my user information. Consider this as a table, and I have a function. The function does is, by giving the user ID, it will return an object. Okay, now we are defining a main function. Okay, this is a node, and from the node I'm going to call a function. Okay, I'm going to call a task, so which will actually fetch the user information, and here we have defined the cache policy. Okay, now let's build it. I can define the state graph. State. I believe I need to import the state graph. So from LangGraph dot graph import state graph. Okay, now let's do it again. Now add builder dot add. Here I can add a node. So the node name is main, and I can define the main. Builder dot set entry point. This is main. Now compile the graph. Builder dot compile. I can define the cache is equal to in-memory cache. Okay, so now everything is ready. Now let's run it. I can do graph dot invoke. Okay, here I am passing my user ID. My user ID I can pass it as a 1. Now let's have a stream mode which is equal to update. So I'm going to execute this. So I believe this code is clear. So as I mentioned, I have a task to fetch the data. So I have a node function. The node will call a task. Okay, the task is caching the information. Now let me execute it. We'll see how much time it will take. I am passing the user ID as 1. Okay, key error name. Okay, in the here we are passing get user info, user dot name, its names I have given. So let me correct it and let me execute it again. We'll see. Okay, now what I am seeing is I am getting Alice information. Okay, and here age is 24 and name is Alice. So we can see the first name is Alice, which is correct. Now let's execute it again. Earlier it took nearly 2 seconds. Now it is getting data from the cache. We can see that cached. In metadata we can see cached is equal to true, and this is returning the data from the cache. Now let's make it as a 2. So executing again, I'm getting the Bob value. Okay, so this is not from the cache, this is the real time. Now this is from the cache. Now let's have the 1. So 1 we are getting as what we called as 0 seconds, and 2 we are getting from the 0 second because both are from the cache. Now let me have it in the 4, and it's executing. It's taking nearly 2 seconds. Now let's execute it again. Now this is from the cache, and now we are getting the 0 seconds. So see the power of this particular cache, right? So which means we can do some kind of a time intensive task into cache. Okay, then we will able to fetch that. Consider this is a real time, right? Instead of this data frame, just consider it as a database to fetch the data, fetch the user information. So we can easily fetch the user information and we can cache it. And if you want to clear the cache, okay, so whenever we have a any user update is happening, we can just call the cache.clear. So we can trigger, if some data bit update is happening, we can trigger a event, then we will able to clear the cache. Now let's execute it. Okay, so this should be working. Cache.clear should be working. Let me see it here. Let me have the cache underscore cache. Let's see. Okay, because this cache is here, so we are defining the in-memory cache. That's why it's not clearing it. So let me make it a separate like this. Okay, now I'm referring this cache to cache. So I'm executing it. First time this is from the memory and second time from the cache. Now hitting the clear, trying it again. This is taking 2 seconds, right? So in this way we can easily manage the cache. So I believe this is very useful. So that is all about in this video. Please do like and subscribe. Have a nice day. Bye bye.